This is Sky News at 9. Coming up, we'll see what's on the front pages of tomorrow's papers as they come in with the defence editor of The Times, Deborah Haynes, and Africa expert, Ayo Johnson, after this short break. This is Sky News at 9. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. And in the next half hour, we'll see what's making tomorrow's headlines with the defence editor of The Times, Deborah Haynes, and Africa expert, Ayo Johnson. But first, well, that's today's news. Let's have a look at tomorrow's. And we're joined, as I introduced you earlier, by Deborah Haynes and Ayo Johnson. Nice to see you both. Only a couple of papers in so far, The Independent and The Express. But let's start with The Independent. Its picture there is of Usain Bolt, and we'll talk about him in a moment. But first of all, Libya has, of course, been on the front pages so much over the past couple of weeks. There's an interesting column by Patrick Cockburn on the side here. Can you vacate your room, sir? Libya's new government needs it. Pointing out that the National Transitional Council are keen for rooms. They're clearly moving into the city, aren't they?
Yeah, it's quite a funny story to have on the front page because, you know, you're having all these eyewitness accounts of massacres and suffering. And Patrick Cockburn is moaning about how he hasn't got a bathroom towel in his hotel room. So maybe he's trying to get a light-hearted look at Libya.
Is it slightly tongue-in-cheek, or has he just had a sense of humour failure about not having a particularly comfortable night's sleep?
I hope it's tongue-in-cheek, because given the discomfort that lots of people are suffering, I don't think anyone's going to have that much sympathy for someone who hasn't got a bath towel.
Well, there's a major issue there. The National Transitional Council wants to show that it's in charge. It's trying to show that it can control its people on the ground. And taking over this hotel is just a sign that they're in control. And I think there's a lighter side to it. A man who's clearly trying to say that someone is used a towel that was formerly owned by somebody else, and they're a bit confused about some notes that he found that related to some, you know, so it's not very clear as to what he's trying to say, but I think he's trying to bring a lighter side when there's something clearly quite serious happening in Libya.
The National Transition Council clearly are in town, and of course you just come back from Tripoli, Deborah. They are struggling to restore water and electricity and fuel quickly. How crucial is it that they get these things fixed quickly for the future of the country?
It's massively important. I mean, it's things like water, electricity, police on the street that give people that sense of security that they need for the country to rebuild. I mean, we saw what happened in Iraq when they didn't have those basic services. It just adds to that sense of chaos. And at the moment, Tripoli is in this really sort of transitional period where, unless proper order is restored, you are going to have, you know, cracks emerging which will be exploited by people who like the idea of chaos.
And what about the NTC? I mean, we know who some of the political leaders are, but we certainly don't know who a lot of the military leaders were that brought them from all the different regions into Tripoli. Should we really be backing the NTC? Do we know enough about them to back them?
Well, no one knows who they are. They're a combination of many people from different parts of Libya, women, school teachers, middle-class professionals, people who've defected from the old regime. But clearly, they're there to show that they can govern that country, and they're trying their very best to do so. Clearly, we can't go back to the way Libya used to be ruled under Gaddafi, and I think they should be supported. They need all the money that's around the world to come back to Libya and for them to be able to govern effectively. It's going to be very difficult, but they need a lot of support.
I think as well, I mean, there's people in the Western Mountains, for example, and you know, in the west of the country, who do feel as though they aren't properly represented on the council, because obviously it was set up in Benghazi and has a real sort of Eastern Libya makeup to it. So I think it's important that you make sure you have buy-in from all the different groups, because obviously the rebels are, you know, they're a disparate sort of network of people, and if they're not all on board, then there are going to be problems.
But it's clear that war crimes have been committed. It appears that the ones that we certainly have filmed were carried out by pro-Gaddafi troops, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility that we are going to see reprisals on the streets, and we're going to see retaliatory attacks.
Well, I spoke to this gentleman the other day who's he was in the Abu Salim prison, and he was there for 2 months, brutally tortured, according to his testimony. He was set free and then arrested just before the Zawiya revolt happened again a couple of weeks ago. And when he was set free, I was talking to him and he was telling me about his mistreatment, and I asked him what he would do if he met the people who did that to him, and he said he would kill them. And I think a lot of people are going to be feeling that desire for revenge, which again needs to be you know, dealt with.
Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International have already criticised the Libyan government previously for crimes against humanity, but nonetheless, when you have a war, there are crimes committed on both sides. And clearly, the National Transitional Council might have committed some crimes. And, of course, that would have to be investigated as well.
And tonight, of course, we've had Gaddafi offering to discuss a handover of power. I mean, you know, everyone's saying, well, it's already happened, hasn't it? But, you know, are you surprised that he's still able to get his messages out?
No,
despite you know, the fact that Tripoli fell effectively 7 days ago.
It is kind of a bizarre situation, but then, you know, as anyone who's been in the Rixos, that whole place was like a bizarre setup. And, you know, Musa Ibrahim, you know, he's British educated, very eloquent man, is quite a smooth operator. He understands the media, and he knows that, you know, as long as they're still talking, then they've still kind of got breath in them. So it just kind of really ups the need to find Gaddafi and put an end to that side of this conflict.
I think Gaddafi's desperate for a carrot. He knows he can't go anywhere. He's really pushed in the corner. He's desperate to actually negotiate his way out of trouble. No one's going to help him. He's in real trouble now, and he's trying to use every means possible to wiggle his way out, but it can't happen.
Indeed. Well, the lead story on The Independent is about the Royal Bank of Scotland. Now, it's suggesting that they're facing damaging revelations about their ethical record. And this is because that the bank was part of a deal to issue more than $800 million in Belarusian government bonds earlier this year. I mean, effectively saying that, you know, they weren't investing the money ethically. Should we really be surprised that the big banks aren't very concerned about ethics?
I guess not. I mean, they're all about wanting to make money, aren't they? I mean, they sort of list a whole bunch of other banks that also were involved in that deal. So Deutsche Bank, Paribas, I mean, they're big names. I guess it's embarrassing, but it's not surprising.
But there's an element of responsibility by the banks. I mean, they've got to make sure they're lending the money to the right sort of people and the money's being used effectively to help countries. And this particular instance, clearly they've done something quite wrong.
But, I mean, there clearly are ethical banks out there. I think it was the Cooperative that always, you know, highlights its ethical status. A bank like this, which is part state-owned, it has a duty to make as much money as possible, doesn't it? I mean, shouldn't we all be hoping that they invest in whatever they can in order to get our money back?
But then maybe because it is part, you know, you've got that big public stake in it, maybe that means it should actually be a bit better than the more cutthroat, you know, investment banks.
Their standards, the ethical responsibility, corporate social responsibility from banks, these large banks, they've got to render money effectively, responsibly, and clearly this time round they've not done so.
Well, also on the front of The Independent is this image of Usain Bolt missing. He did a false start, basically, and immediately disqualified from the 100-metre final of the World Championships in South Korea. This is a new ruling that's come in, isn't it, about false starts, and he's not the first one to fall foul of it. Does it seem that this possibly wasn't the best rule that anyone's ever made up in world sport?
Well, Dwayne Chambers, Christian Urugu have all made mistakes like that. Clearly, the world's fastest man, it could happen to him. I think it's a shame because clearly he would have gone out and broken the world record. I think it takes away from the fans exactly for them to have seen their hero performing at the very highest level. And it actually shows that the rule itself is flawed and has got to be looked up again. I think it leans back. I think the reasons why they did it was mainly to do with pressures from advertisers who wanted times and seconds to be accommodated within their broadcast schedule. So it's a shame, but I think they've got to look to it because so many people are being affected by it, and the sport itself doesn't feel that much more enjoyable, and I think it's taking away from what the fans would really want to celebrate about.
And the Olympics on the horizon as well, and perhaps pressure will be put on them that might be a good opportunity for them to reverse this.
Yeah, I mean, that poor bloke, you have to feel sorry for him, don't you? He looks really gutted.
Well, absolutely, all that training
yeah.
and you don't get to race. It must be infuriating.
He's got to look forward to 200 now.
Yeah, there you go. The Guardian's come in now. You haven't seen it yet, but this is its front page. It's got a great picture there on the front of Hurricane Irene. Let's have a quick zoom in on this. It says, much ado about Irene, but Manhattan dodges the meteorological bullet. They've had a bit of a lucky escape, haven't they, in New York? Do you think that possibly they overreacted a little bit?
A little bit. I was taking the mickey out of an American friend of mine who was sort of talking about how he's been stockpiling food. And I'm like, last night I spoke to him and it'd been downgraded to a Category 1 hurricane, and then now we hear it's just a storm. You know, it was stormy at West Wishing yesterday. I didn't moan.
But I suppose on a serious note, 14 people have died, and there are 3.6 million people without electricity.
Yeah,
so
okay, fair enough.
it is more serious down the coast, but not in New York. And it was New York that people were concerned about, wasn't it? Because of the number of people there, obviously, and the fact that it is so low lying, it could have been, you know, pretty catastrophic.
I think the Americans have got away lightly on this. It could have been far more worse, especially having all these tall buildings in New York and the low-lying areas in Manhattan. So it's a good thing it's happened. It's a good thing that they've escaped it. But I think we've got to look at the logistics behind it. How prepared were they? How can they prevent this from happening in the future, especially if you're going to have hurricanes happening in this part of the woods, which doesn't traditionally happen in places like New York. And of course, it's going to cost a lot of money to put everything right again. So it's going to cost billions.
It is, absolutely. Let's zoom out to look at the full page. And its headline is a story that was on the front page of, I think it was the Telegraph yesterday, about anti-abortion lobby. The government has agreed to strip charity-run advisory services of its counselling role. It has been in the news today. It is, of course, always a controversial subject, but the idea being that women should not be offered counselling by the same organisations that carry out abortions. What's your feeling about that, Deborah?
It does kind of make sense. I mean, if you're, companies like Mary Stopes, they are businesses. I mean, obviously you can get referred to them by your GPs, but the people who want to go there privately, they do rely on the counselling service that's provided. And obviously Mary Stopes and the others will say that it's an independent advice. But given that they're part of the whole service and you are paying for that advice, it does kind of make sense to maybe have it independently. Although I do take the point that they make in that article, that there is a concern that this could lengthen the time for someone who's looking for an abortion. And obviously, if you're in that sort of situation, then every day counts, every second counts, because you obviously want, if you're going to have an abortion, to deal with it as soon as possible.
I think it allows women to actually make that life and death decision, think about it carefully before they make that choice. And I think this law would actually help them to be able to make that decision and that choice in a safe environment, but more so in a time when they've got to be thinking correctly. And sometimes you make these decisions and you regret them later. So it's very much about making it the right time.
Indeed. Thanks both very much. Well, lots to come after the break, including find out about the drug that apparently will save millions of lives. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're looking through the newspaper front pages as they come in with the defence editor of The Times, Deborah Haynes, and Africa expert, Ayo Johnson. Now, a couple more papers have dropped into our inbox during the break, including the FT. Its headline is about the Christine Lagarde, the head of the International Monetary Fund, and they're saying that she's been criticised for making confused and misguided attack on the health of Europe's banks. Ayo, just remind us what she said and what it means.
She made a stark reminder to the European banks to say, you've got to start lending among one another, you've got to get a bit more liquidity, you've got to raise money outside of your traditional forms of collecting money. And if you fail to do so, we could head back into a global recession. So it's a stark warning, but also saying that some of the banks in Europe are weak, saying that the banks in Britain and especially France are much stronger than Greece and some of the other banks in Spain. So it's a stark reminder to say that you've got to lend money, you've got to start lending money between yourselves, and you've got to start recapitalising the money you've got within your system.
But the problem is, of course, with countries like Greece and Spain and the countries that people are concerned about their economy, people aren't necessarily going to want to lend, or necessarily want to borrow from them, are they? Well,
absolutely. But it just shows how bad the economies are. What you have is weak structures, weak governments, especially that of Greece, as you've realised lately, and of course the infrastructure is also weak with the banks, and the banks have got to start lending to one another, and there's a need for the money to start spinning around and for commerce to start working again, and it's not happening in some of these banks.
I think the point is that why this story is interesting is that these are the comments that she's made, but unfortunately they haven't had a very good reception, and people are saying that she's kind of missed the point. And it's, they know very well that you need to have banks lending again, but there isn't the liquidity to lend. And so she's being accused of sending misguided and confused messages, which is going to be embarrassing for her, given that she's only just got into the job after what happened to her predecessor.
But she's trying to prevent us from going back into a recession, and we know exactly. And I think it's the balance between raising interest rates and doing the difficult things, which usually the population as a whole doesn't like, as opposed to getting money back into the economy.
And also sort of linked into that is another article on the front page about lower corn harvest forecasts, raising fears over higher food prices, and this is, I suppose, linked into it as well, isn't it? We're all fearful about prices going up and the possibility of going into a recession again, and it looks like food price inflation is going to go on being a threat in 2012.
Well, throughout this year, we've had food hikes, prices going up, inflation at its very highest, the price of petrols at the top pumps really, really bad. If this were to happen and if it gets really bad, how a family's going to survive? So, and if you think about it, it doesn't match with earnings, so it's a real problem all around.
Let's quickly look at the I newspaper. It's got a a story which we've probably all forgotten about, strike threat to the new school term. And this is saying that a moderate teaching union leader is warning of a looming cloud of industrial action. Teaching unions are going to follow. It's all about the pensions row, which has been unresolved. There were some strikes, of course, towards the end of last term, if my memory serves me right. But of course, we've been in the school holidays, so we've perhaps forgotten all about them. Deborah, you're just saying, you know, your sister's a teacher. Striking is not something that they do lightly, you suggest.
Well, yeah, my sister kind of gets really fed up when they're striking. She says that at her school, or her old school, there were people that really wanted to have a good strike because they were all sort of fired up about the whole pensions row. And obviously, it is an issue that's very sensitive to lots of people. But for her, as a young teacher, she got really annoyed with having to go out and strike because she doesn't get paid. She doesn't think it's that effective. And I'm sure she's not going to be too happy with the idea that the school term hasn't even started and another strike's looming.
But I suppose parents also, because, you know, you send your child off to school and you go off to work, and on strike days it causes absolute chaos, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's such a pain. It's such a pain because you can't go to your work. You have to go back and look after your child. So it really sort of messes everyone up. But then obviously they've got to fight for their rights. So, you know, fair play.
I think it's finding that balance between people who, especially teachers, wanting better income, better earnings, and trying to shout out about it and saying, "Gosh, we're worth a bit more," as opposed to kids who are likely to be affected by their school closing as a result of those strikes. So it's getting those balance, and for parents to be that much more considerate and understanding.
Now to the Daily Express. Now, its headline is the one we teased before the break. They're talking about a drug that will save millions of lives. These are cholesterol-busting statins, and it's been found that they not only slash death rates from heart disease and strokes, but they may also protect people from serious infections and respiratory disease. So is this a new aspirin? Should we all be taking one every day?
Well, I'll advise not to, but clearly from what the scientists are saying is that this drug does lower your cholesterol, does help your heart, it keeps you slightly fitter than you'd otherwise be, and they're recommending it as the blueprint for one to live longer. So clearly in the future, I'm sure most GPs will be recommending it, but yet still at a testing phase.
Yeah, also, the Daily Express always splashes on like some new whizzy drug doing something awesome. So you kind of like take it with a pinch of salt until someone else reports it.
Because also next week another paper will have, you know, statins are the new killer
exactly.
drug that millions are on, and they're going to make your left arm fall off or something. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the other papers pick up on this. And also a picture of Sally Bercow there on the right. She wants to do a wife swap with Big Brother's Paddy. Do either of you have a view on this, very briefly?
Well, I'm not a Big Brother fan. I stopped watching it years ago. But nonetheless, if she wants to do it, it's quite entitled for her to do so. It's about being liberalised, doing what you like when you like. So good on her.
Good on her. Well, that's the front of the Express. Let's take a quick flip through all the other front pages that have come into us so far this evening. The Financial Times leading on those comments of Christine Lagarde, saying that she's made a confused and misguided attack on the health of Europe's banks. The Guardian, its headline is about the anti-abortion lobby, talking about the possible changes to the abortion system and counselling for women facing abortion. It has a picture there of a taxi in New York going through the torrential rain in the capital there. The I newspaper, as we were just talking about, the threat of strikes to the new school term, and it pictures there some teachers out on strike. The Independent, talking about the Royal Bank of Scotland and whether or not its investments have been ethical. It also pictures Usain Bolt there, a victim of the new ruling which disqualified him for doing a false start at the 100-metre final. And the back pages come in from the Independent. Manchester 13, London 3. This is reflecting Man U's 8-2 win over Arsenal, and Tottenham 1, Man City 5. Lots more on that, I'm sure, later on in our full paper review. But just time for me to thank Deborah Haynes and Io Johnson for taking us through your choices. Thanks very much this evening. And now let's have a look at the weather.